Hello and welcome to another episode of PsycKicks. My name is Liv, and this is the podcast where we talk about all things metaphysical, spiritual, paranormal, and in between. Today, we're going to be talking about more listeners' stories. Everyone in the comments was like, we love listener stories. So here you go. I also need to take a breather and recollect myself to get more actual stories about Hecate, so mythologies that she's a part of, before we continue on more with that or on a new endeavor. But I'm excited to talk to you guys about some of the listener stories I have picked today. I'm not going to lie. Some of them make me uncomfortable because I honestly truly don't know the answers. However, there are talking points that we can talk about, and they are good stories because I don't know the answer to them. Does that make sense? I feel like if I don't know the answer to something, it is intriguing to me. So therefore, I'm hoping that it is also intriguing to you. They're pretty scary. Before we get into today's listener stories, I do have a bit of a life update for you. It's nothing like super fancy, but if you don't want to listen to the things that I think about outside of professional work, which is like recording podcasts and doing readings and making YouTube content in the form of videos, etc., then you can skip past listening to my life update, my personal thoughts, whatever. In the show notes below, there'll be a timestamp that says Liv's Life Update. If you don't want to listen to it, just skip on to the next timestamp and we can go from there. But without further ado, these are the things that I've been thinking about. Okay, so I think I only have one thing that I wanted to share with you all about stuff that I've been thinking about. So what is it? I'm trying to figure out how I want to say this. I've been struggling lately. I don't know if it's mom brain or I'm just having brain farts consecutively all the time. It's easier for me, or maybe I'm doing too many readings. I don't know. It's been easier for me to conceptualize things in my head, like see them in the form of emotions and pictures together, than being able to put what I see and think about in my brain into words. So much so that when I ask my husband to help me with something, I can't articulate what it is that I'm seeing in my brain to words coming out of my mouth. And I end up just going, never mind, I'll do it myself, because I'm like struggling to explain or express verbally what it is that I need to tell him, because it's just lost in pictures and feelings in my head. So I'm trying to think about, how do I explain what it is that I want to talk to you about? So we talk about a lot in this podcast, theorizing, hypothesizing, sharing about the concept and idea of past lives, right? Oh, one of my favorite shows right now on Netflix, which I just got back because my sister-in-law's like, I got you guys a Netflix account because you are so sad with not having like actual TV to watch. But one of my favorite shows that I started watching years ago, like when it first came out, is called Call the Midwife. It's crazy to me. I like stuff that's based on like historical things, like historical fiction, not fantasy, but historical fiction. And I know this Netflix series was based off of like the memoirs of a woman, and it just boggles my mind. And one of my favorite characters, if you guys don't know the show, it's a very girly show, but one of my favorite characters is Sister Julianne. I just love her presence. She's kind of like the Uncle Iroh from Avatar: The Last Airbender, if that's a show that you like. Call the Midwife, Sister Julianne is like the Uncle Iroh of this show, and it's just crazy to I know that the show was inspired by the memoirs of a woman. However, you can see as the seasons go on that the writers start to shy away from a little bit of like what the memoirs probably wrote or were written about to form these characters. But Sister Julianne always stays constant in the way that she is. And I just I've had the thought cross my mind to write to these British writers, the people that make this show, like a couple of them, because I know sometimes writers and producers and directors change from like season or show or episode to episode. But I don't understand how people are so, even just with books, I don't understand how people are so good at giving life to characters. Because I love reading. It's hard for me to try and read or do things on my computer, because as soon as I do that, my son is like, I need to be a part of touching buttons and ripping pages out of your book. But watching Sesame Street or something, or sneaking away while I'm doing dishes and listening to Call a Midwife while Oak plays, is something that I can do. And it how can people create such beautiful characters when it's not themselves? You know what I'm saying? Someone could be a certain person, who they are in this life right now, but then they create such beautiful, memorable, crazy, outrageously awesome, amazing characters in books and in TV shows. And I feel like this TV show has so many characters that are just awe-inspiring and awesome, I guess, as characters. And it got me thinking that perhaps, and this is just a thought that popped into my head, I'm not saying it's like spiritual fact or anything like that. It's something that I thought would be a romantically fun thing to think about. What if the characters that you create, or the characters that these people create for TV shows, like what I'm talking about, are like parts of themselves from past lives, people that they actually knew? Like, I know Sister Julianne, her character was based off a real person, but the way they've harnessed and just continued to perpetuate her character throughout the series is just like a chef's kiss to me, you know? And then Sister Monica Joan is also one of my favorite characters too. And if you watch season 1 versus like the seasons that are happening now, like the later seasons, they sort of move away from her like dementia stage of being a character, or like losing life, being old, and embrace it in a different way. But these characters, how are writers so able to harness the just essence of these fictional people? And I had the idea of like, maybe they were these people in a past life, or maybe they knew people like this in a past life, or they knew people like this in a current life. I mean, it doesn't matter. It was just something that I was thinking about. Perhaps these are characters that have been based on just the passage of people, which you could think about in a non-spiritual sense too, like get rid of past lives and everything like that before too. It's just the fact that people have known and read about people that are like this too. So to create a character, I don't know, it's just like a crazy art form to me. Character building, creating characters in books and in shows to like that capacity. It's just something that's been on my mind. Anyways, do you guys have a favorite character that you know about that you would want to just like fangirl about? If you're listening on the PsycKicks Extras YouTube channel, please let me know in the comments below, or leave a review on Spotify or Apple Podcasts if you like. Just like some character that's like spoken to you on like a spiritual level. Because I think the creation of characters can be a very spiritual thing too. It's like embodying past people, even if it's not literal, but more figurative. I think it's really cool, and it's beautifully done. So anyways, that's my life update. It's a little silly, I guess, but it's something that's been on my mind, and I just wanted to share it with you all. So let's get on to the listener stories. All right, so this week's listener stories are just ones that I read through and picked, just like always. And this first one, it's the scariest one to me. And the reason it's the scariest one to me, I would say, is just because I don't necessarily understand it, nor has it been anything that I've ever experienced, nor do I ever hope to experience it. So Abigail, who sent this in, kudos to you, because I would have absolutely freaked the frick out and I probably would never talk about it again. Well, actually, no, that's wrong. I would probably talk about it because I will talk about later in the podcast for a different story as to why I share about things that are scary to me, to other people. But anyways, all right, Abigail, this is your story. I hope everyone else enjoys it because it's terrifying to me. The title of Abigail's story is The Night I Can Never Forget. Abigail says, when I was younger, about 15 or 16, me and my friend at the time were in the house all by ourselves. We were watching a Netflix show, as you do, when we heard what sounded like someone throwing things about up the stairs. As we both knew we were supposedly alone, we got frightened and thought someone had broken into my friend's house, so naturally we decided to confront whoever had decided to rob us. We went into the bathroom of the stairs, still hearing the sounds of objects falling, and I had the idea of shouting up to them to make themselves known, as I had a weapon. Goodness. I live in the UK and was most definitely lying through my teeth, but thought mentioning that would make the said person show themselves. I was young, haha. However, when I uttered this, it seemed to have no effect. So out of arrogance or stupidity, I'm not quite sure, I decided to start to venture up the stairs to confront whoever was there. However, as I got up to the second step, I had noticed the door that was visible from the staircase started to creak open, which in an instant sent shivers down my spine. I shouted again in an attempt to understand what was going on. "Whoever you are, make yourself known." At this point, I was getting pretty aggravated. However, as I finished my sentence, the door flung open. I remember the smash of the door hitting the wall and the sound of loud running towards me on the stairs. But what totally stopped me in my tracks was the fact that I could hear these steps getting closer and closer to me in quick succession, but there was no person there to match these footsteps. At this moment, I froze in fear, and I was expecting a person to come belting at me from that room, which I had mentally prepared for, but instead I got something I could not see. As I stood there frozen, listening to the heart-tilling footsteps as they drove closer and closer to me, all while I was trying to understand what the F was happening, they stopped at the step in front of me. I felt a gust of cold, airy wind hit my face, and I looked at my friend in disbelief of what happened. Let's just say that night we didn't sleep, and we spent most of the night drawing protection symbols and putting them on the doors to stop whatever that was. I woke up the next morning with both my arms covered in scratches. This is relevant now. Me and that friend are no longer in contact for other reasons, but anytime I bring this story up to my family or friends, I have found visible scratches on my neck or body in the shape of the initials of that friend. What the hell did we encounter that day? Do I have an attachment? If so, I would kindly like to get rid of it. I would love to hear what you guys make from this story. I wish I had some physical proof that this really happened to me, but I'm sure I have photos of the most recent scratches somewhere. I wanted to get this story out there and share my experience as it still freaks me out to this day, and recently spooky things in my life and my fiance's life have started to pick up. Abbigail. All right, Abbigail. Oh, let's talk about this. I don't know if I have an answer for you, but I have two theories. So last night when I was going through stories to try and pick ones to share on the podcast today, while I was reading Abigail's, I know we talked about this in last listener story, right? And I talked about how sometimes when I read stories on my own and then I talk about stories, I will perceive or think or have a hypothesis about something that's different from when I'm just reading the story myself to when I start talking about it out loud. So I have two hypothesis spooky paranormal theories for you, Abbigail. The first one is when I was reading your story by myself, I envisioned this woman that has like short, blonde, streaked hair. Her hair might have been brown and it is streaked or highlighted with blonde, but it's short and she's older, late 40s to late 50s, mid 50s maybe. You know, like when your skin starts to get wrinkly just a little bit, but you still look, fine, I guess. Not to say that wrinkly skin isn't fine, but it's just, you know what I'm talking about. And she's very, very thin, very thin. She's wearing a shirt that is like a 3/4 or a quarter length t-shirt that is striped horizontally. There's like reds, yellows, tans, and greens, and it's a V-neck, almost like knitted sweater, sort of. And when you told in the story that you heard things upstairs being dropped and like lifted and flittered around, I felt like it was an angry, angry soul of a woman, right? And the soul of this woman almost gives me banshee vibes. So when I perceive what I would think energetically is like a banshee or a being referred to as a banshee, it's like a scary woman. It's not necessarily a soul of a woman. It's more of an entity or a negative thing, but it's like think the grudged girl type of vibes. That's usually what I associate banshees to. Now, this woman gave me woman-y vibes. Like she had a reason for being as angry as she was. And for whatever reason, it was being portrayed in your house at the time that it was. I'm not sure why, but this soul of this woman gave me very banshee vibes, which again is not a soul. It's more of an entity. So when I talk about human souls and entities, they're very different. But the only time I've ever perceived a soul that was almost like unraveling into something else, I was petitioned the opportunity to go to Alcatraz. And I did not want to go to Alcatraz because in the maximum security, quiet, like sensory deprivation room, you guys know what I'm talking about. I always perceive, yet I've never actually physically been to Alcatraz, the scariest soul of a man whose soul is almost like unraveling into something that isn't human. And I'm not saying that the woman in this house that I perceived when I was reading your story, Abbigail, is as close to that, but just the most violently angry soul I've ever perceived. And I don't usually talk to souls that are that violently angry. So that might be one explanation to your story. Again, I don't know why she would be there, where she was, and what she was doing, nor do I know why she would scratch you. However, I've never experienced physical things like that before, and it is still of my opinion that you have control over that. Like you can say, you do not have dominion over me in that way. You cannot physically hurt me. You cannot physically scratch me, etc., etc. You may be angry for whatever reasons I may or may not understand. However, that is separate and completely kept away from me. Because I know, Abigail, you said that you have had subsequent scratches after this. Why they're in the initials of your friend? I don't know. I feel like it could be the angry soul of this woman associating herself to you. I don't know how I feel about attachments. I don't think people necessarily have attachments in a sense of like you physically can't get rid of something. But if you know that something's there, again, you can tell them not to be attached to you. Does that make sense? I think the word attachment makes people think that you can't get rid of it or it's something that is out of your control, but I'm still under the belief of that you have control over these things, even if you might not feel like it. So why would they scratch you in the name of your friend? It may just be, if it's a human soul that's just really angry for reasons that we don't understand, and they're sort of unraveling and being very violent and angry. Souls know, see, hear, and feel everything, right? I don't think negative entities know, see, hear, and feel everything. You have to tell them specific things about yourself or make it known to them or think about it and feel like you don't have control over it in order for them to understand things about you. But if it's a soul that's really angry, they may know that you and your friend are no longer talking for reasons that we don't know on this podcast, and therefore may try to scare you when you think about that, if that makes any sense. As of like this friend is making this happen, or the relationship with your friend is causing this weird paranormal activity to happen. But I don't think that's the case. So that is my answer for your story. When I read your story, I 100% thought that it was just a really angry soul of a woman upstairs. I honestly thought that it could have been just the house replaying energy of like a really bad encounter or really bad memory or situation or accident or incident that happened at the house. So the house was more so residually having you guys experience that stuff, like hearing things move and bang and clack about it can happen in houses where it's not actively haunting. It's not a soul or spirit actively doing it. It's more so just the house creating those echoes itself, kind of like a picture, if you will. It's like imprinting on it and energetically speaking. So it replays itself like a record. A record is an imprint. And then when something stimulates it, it creates sound, right? That would be like a good analogy for a residual haunting. But when you told me that you felt a cold gush of air come meet at your face, I hate that. When I go to actual like physical haunted locations for investigations and a soul walks through me, I always get goosebumps, and like full body goosebumps. When a soul walks through me or interferes with me, I will get goosebumps everywhere. The most recent time I had that happen, and probably the most like clustered, profound, I don't know what's a better word for that, time that I experienced like a soul actually walking through me or physically interfering with me like that was Amanda's first video of our trip to New Orleans. So if you guys don't know who Mackie and Amanda are, they are other YouTube content creators that PsycKicks has worked with in the past. And we've even went to the Conjuring House with Amanda. But most recently, I went to New Orleans with Amanda and we did a paranormal investigation regarding the Carter brothers who were suspected to be vampires in New Orleans. And during our investigation in the stairwell of the Delphine Hotel, I believe, I kept getting full body chills subsequently, just like one after another that were almost in sync with the Bell EMF reader that we were using and getting information with. It was crazy. So that's what makes me think that it was physical, like an actual active haunting and not a residual haunting, coupled with the fact that you have scratches afterwards, which again is not something I've ever experienced. So I really can't speak to it, but you sent in your question. So I'm going to try to give you like a knowledge dump of everything that it could be, even if it's not, just to sort of arm or equip yourself with knowledge. Because I think we are scared by things that we don't understand, but if we're able to understand them, they no longer scare us, right? Ignorance sometimes is what causes people to be scared or just not knowing about something. But once you're equipped with that knowledge, then it's not so scary anymore. The other thing that I think could have happened is obviously the soul of this woman is not happy, very unhappy, very negative. But if something negative happened in the house to sort of cause that haunting of her like smashing things or tumbling or pushing things down, whatever, that is just a lot of energy in and of itself. And to have an experience like that happen to you and then scare you as much as it did, it may have caused more poltergeisty sort of activity as well, especially with the ending of your friendship, maybe. Just like I'm thinking of negative energy that might attract more poltergeisty things. And I feel like scratches could be a poltergeisty thing, but I've never heard about it or heard people getting scratched from a poltergeist. It's usually more developed negative entities. However, that's still not to say that you can't talk about them. Maybe I should just talk about this now. We're going to talk about later in today's podcast about some dreams that people have had. And one of the things that I wanted to mention was that when I was little, I used to have scary dreams a lot. One of them was like a sleep paralysis dream about, I think I called them like the orange-eyed demon or something. I know I've talked about this sleep paralysis dream because it's really the only one I've ever had, but it's the most memorable in my life on the podcast or in videos sprinkled, peppered throughout time, right? In the last 4 or 5 years. So I've mentioned it a handful of times throughout the content. And the reason I've done that is because when I was little and I had bad dreams happen to me, and I think this could be used in bad situations, just like Abbigail is sharing her story with us today. If you share the bad stories or the bad dreams, my mother used to tell me that if you tell people about your bad dreams, then the bad dreams will go away. And I think that has sort of carried me into today as well, because if you hide from the things that scare you, whether they be dreams and don't talk about them and keep them to yourselves because they're so scary, or encounters like Abigail's had and you keep them to yourselves and you think that they're so scary, that's hiding from the thing that's hurting you. You know, it's making more room for those scary things to exist by making yourself small. So if you say, no, I see you, scary, weird thing, and I don't like you, they're going to be like, oh no, you see me? I can't continue being mean to you and walking all around your space. I think that's a pretty good thing. Like a pretty good mindset to have when you talk about these things, right? Because you're taking power away from the thing that scares you. You're saying, I see you and you can't stay here anymore. And I think, Abigail, if you start to think about the situation in this way, again, metaphysical and spiritual things are all energy. If you change the energy that you feel around the situation, it will keep not allowing whatever may or may not be there to infringe upon your space by saying, I don't hold space for you. You know what I'm saying? So there you go. I hope that answers your question. I think it might be a human soul originally that just was having a really bad time, and you got to relive that bad time, that temper tantrum, if you will, to just let out that energy. And I don't understand the scratches. It could be the human soul, but again, if it is, you have to talk about it and you have to say that's not allowed. You're free to leave and go from there. I hope I was able to answer your question. And if not, at least give you some empowering ideas in order to help your situation on your own. So thank you, Abigail, for sending in your story. It was one of the scariest, again, because I've never experienced physical things like that. And I hope and pray that I never will. But thank you so much for sending in your story, and we'll move on to the next one. All right, our next story is sent in by Sean. And the title of Sean's story is The Grim Reaper. Sean says, when I was a kid, I would see ghosts everywhere, and this is one of the strangest stories I have. So me, my brother, and my dad went to a baseball game, and when the game ended, everyone got up to leave. As we were making our way through the heavy crowds, I see a large figure walking towards our direction, dressed all in black. He was wearing a cloak, and at first, I thought it was a mascot or someone in costume, but I quickly realized something was up when I noticed that instead of a face, there was a completely empty void of darkness under his hood. I was also the only person that seemed to acknowledge him, which I thought was odd. As he got closer to me, I saw that he was wearing black leather shoes, a large black cloak, and he had human hands and a large flowing cape that floated behind him. The best way to describe his cape is like the one worn by Voldemort in Harry Potter. Again, there was no face or visor or anything, just complete darkness, which really unnerved me. The figure also had no trouble making his way through the heavy crowds. The people seemed to just part in front of him as he casually walked past us. I watched him walk away for as long as I could until I saw someone behind me and he disappeared into thin air. When I asked my brother and dad about the cloaked man, they had no idea what I was talking about. If you can give more insight into what I saw, it would be greatly appreciated. Thank you, Sean. No, Sean, thank you. Again, I don't have an answer for this, but we're going to theorize about it. Oh, if any of you have other interpretations of this, please let me know in the comments below or leave a review on Apple or Spotify with your insight, because again, I may be a medium, but I'm not I'm not well versed at all in any of the more theoretical and spiritual ideas of stuff like this. However, when I read Sean's story, and again, this freaks me out, I feel like you could be seeing some sort of I want to say the word time being, because that's the only word that I can think of and the only word that just immediately pops into my head. Not necessarily that it's a being that manipulates time, but a being that is able to move through time. But I don't think that, because you titled it Grim Reaper, right? And when I think of the Grim Reaper, I assume that what you're referencing is a dude that steals souls, or when someone's dying, they're there to move their soul into the underworld or heaven, whatever you want to call it. However, I've never experienced a reaper in that sense, that stereotypical sense that I just talked about in my normal readings. I mean, it is of my current understanding that when a soul passes, another human soul is usually there to help, the person who's passing their soul into heaven, spirit, source, whatever you want to call it, the afterlife. But I've never perceived a Grim Reaper. Now, that may just be because that is my flavor of mediumship. I very much deal with human souls and human things. Spirit guides, I feel like I'm able to perceive because they are associated to humans and or have been humans in past lives, which is why I'm able to sort of differentiate that more abstract information because it falls within the energy of human existence. But when it comes to reapers and things like that, it's not something that I've specifically or personally experienced. So, also given the fact that when I read your story, it's just the claircognizant answer that I get, which could be wrong. Now, when I say claircognizant for all of the listeners that may be newer, it's a psychic perception. Everyone has psychic abilities, and it is one of the clairs, which means, you have claircognizant, clairvoyant. It just means psychic or clear, whatever it is that you're talking about. Cognizance is knowing. So clear knowing. Claircognizance is just getting an idea within your head, or however, it's just a perfect idea without knowing who, what, when, where, or why. So claircognizantly, I get the answer of a time being, which freaks me out. So you may have just seen some sort of interdimensional being in a sort of way that was somehow easy for your childhood brain to just understand. See, that's the other thing. You said in the story that you were younger, right? And you went to a baseball game. You didn't say what age you were, which is totally fine. But kids have most kids have an easier time perceiving spiritual, metaphysical, paranormal things, energy, because they don't have an ego. Your ego is your socio-cultural interpretation of the world around you based on the things that you've been taught. So like as a child, it's not until you're older in age that you're taught, oh, ghosts don't exist. So because you don't have that as a child, similar things happen with animals because they don't have an ego. You're able to perceive paranormal, metaphysical things. That's not to say that your abilities are always going to be the same as you get older. They could change, they could go away. I'm just saying that as children don't have to be psychics or mediums. They're just kids. That's why they see things. So this might have just been something that you were able to perceive because you were a child, but I don't think it was a reaper. I don't think it was anything bad. I get an overwhelmingly neutral feeling from reading your story. So do I know exactly what it is? No. The only clear cognizant information is I get like a time being. So some sort of spiritual being that just wades through time, if you will. How or why, I'm not sure, but I don't think it was a reaper or something that we would perceive as something or someone that takes souls or moves soul energy. So I hope that answers your question. And thank you for entering your story. Our next story was sent in by Daniel. Daniel's title of their story is Haunted Room, I guess. Daniel says, "Hi, so it's not necessarily a paranormal story, but I think it's really weird. Basically, when I was 14 years old, I returned to my childhood house for a vacation. I've not been to that house in years because my family and I were living in another country at the time. The whole month I stayed in that house, I couldn't sleep at night. Every time I closed my eyes, I had this image of a black thing on my ceiling above my head that had the head turned like 180 degrees facing me with its white glowing eyes staring at me. One day my parents went down to some of our family friends to party and I was alone and went to sleep in their room because I was scared of that thing. That night was the best sleep I've had in the whole month. My bedroom for me in that house was always scary. Even when I was little, I always had nightmares in there, but only in that room for whatever reason. So now I live in another country and I've never had any experiences like this since, which is why I think it's weird and maybe paranormal. The house is maybe 1.5 centuries old, so I don't know what might have happened on that land or in that house, but it could be something or maybe not. Much love, Daniel." Thank you, Daniel, for your story. I don't like the scary thing on your ceiling either. Makes me uncomfortable. That's nervous laughter for all of you listening out there. And like things like these freak me out. The only time I ever had what I could try to conceptualize or think would be hypnopompic hallucinations, which we've talked about in more depth in a past podcast, which is basically when your brain is still sleeping, but you're physically awake and your brain doesn't catch up with the fact that your body's awake. So you start seeing weird things physically, visually in your room. And when I had that happen to me when I was little, but I was very, very sick. I had like strep throat and croup all at the same time and had a very bad fever and was staying home. And my mom was out going grocery shopping in between taking care of me and everything like that. And I remember seeing like a mummy walking around my room with red eyes. And there was a bat that was flying in the room under the ceiling with red eyes. And it was all just like really, really, really dark figures because it was dark outside and I was in my mom's bed and the lights were off too. And I was just by myself because she's like, you need to just take a nap and like, here's some medicine. We're going to break your fever. It's going to be fine. It's no big deal. But I woke up and I was having like those hallucinations. I saw like a black cat jump on the bed and it also had red eyes. I just had these like dark mass figures with red eyes just walking around the room. And I remember being terrified and I had just woken up from a nap and I was sweating my fever out. So that's the only time I've experienced what I could believe as hypnopompic hallucinations. But I'm not saying that what you saw was a hypnopompic hallucination. I'm just putting it out there because I don't think that we should always just jump to the conclusions of paranormal things, there should be like, instead of the scientific process, maybe a spiritual process of debunking whatever it is before we all start going, it's spooky. But this one also kind of just makes me want to jump to that conclusion. See, I do believe that there are spiritual entities out there, or just energetic entities, whatever you want to dub them as, that can create bad dreams. But I also think your brain can create bad dreams and give you like not good sleep. Especially, I was looking up, Daniel, because of your story, reasons that you could have super vivid nightmares or things like that. And it's everything from stress to, they call it, what was it? It basically boils down to sleep routine. It wasn't sleep health. It was like a different word for basically having like a healthy sleep schedule. So go to bed every day around the same time, wake up around the same time. And people that don't do that are said to have more vivid dreams and more like REM sleep cycles, i.e. having more dreams because your body's not getting through the cycles correctly. It just sort of like keeps like skipping like a record a little bit. But hormonal changes, stress, medications, I guess, can also help facilitate very vivid dreams and not getting good sleep. Again, just trying to go through the non-paranormal things before talking about the being that was on the ceiling of David's bed that had its eyes and head turning 180 degrees. Just... It could have been a very scary being that was associated with that house that just made you very uneasy. Again, it's also not to say, though, that like when I was a child, before I really could communicate with souls and I would just see them, so more psychic than medium, I used to have such terrible anxiety, especially when I felt a soul in the room or I would see them, because I used to physically see them, which is something that I don't anymore. I used to have just the worst unnerving sensations. And even as a child, like when my mother would put me to bed, I had a nightlight, but when they would turn off the lights, I would have my radio on too, because a radio helped me to sleep so that I just could like focus on something else. But when I got older and I was supposed to quote unquote grow out of a nightlight and grow out of listening to the radio, I would still have those anxious thoughts, feeling like maybe someone was in the room with me. And it freaked me out. So I was going somewhere with this and it just completely blanked out of my entire mind. I just remember trying to rationalize and tell myself that the stuff wasn't there, because at the end of the day, technically it's not. It's just an energy essence. There's nothing else more to it, even if there was something there. So I'm not discounting, Daniel, that there could have been some sort of dream entity that was associated with your 150-year-old house. That's crazy. More likely than not, there could have been a lot of weird things in that house, both energetically, like entities, but as well as souls. So, that's what I was trying to say. I wanted to say that sometimes when we perceive things that look scary, they're not always scary. And just because we see something as being scary doesn't mean that it is scary. It's kind of like that, I want to call it like the angel complex, maybe, of where, biblically speaking, angels are supposed to be these giant bazillion-eyed floating monster things, but they're technically supposed to help people. So yeah, I'm not going to say that, because you said that you were afraid in the room. So it really could have just been some really scary, weird sort of entity that was associated to that room in the house and was like, I'm going to steal your dreams, which, I mean, at the end of the day, poltergeists steal negative energy in order to continuate their manifestation, right? To continue their energy. So there could also have been some sort of entity which was there to make you uneasy and have bad dreams, which I don't even think that you said you had bad dreams. You just said that you couldn't sleep at night because this thing was there. So either way, it could have just been some weird poltergeisty thing that knew that it could make you uneasy and therefore did to facilitate its existence. Final answer. I just wanted to mention everything else that people maybe should think about before, if they've had similar experiences, before jumping to the conclusion of it's paranormal and scary. But even if it is, I mean, dream catchers. Maybe try a dream catcher if any of you listeners are thinking about that. Dream catchers are supposed to filter dreams to only let the good ones through and keep the bad ones from coming through. So anyways, moving on. Thank you, Daniel, so much for your story. I appreciate it. Freaked me out. The last story we're going to read today was sent in by Deanna D. And the title of Deanna's story is, Can Spirit Turn Down the Volume? Deanna says, so this is a very small story, but it is one of the stranger experiences I have to share. I'm not particularly sensitive in a psychic sense like my sister and my aunts are, so I don't expect to hear responses or feel something in particular when I speak to spirit or do my version of prayer. However, at the time during this story, my grandmother was dealing with a lot of physical issues on top of dealing with dementia for a while. The level of suffering she was experiencing hurt me to my bone, and living far away with no car, I had no means to show her the comfort and love I wish I could. One night of feeling absolutely overwhelmed with my emotions regarding the situation, I was curled up in bed sobbing, asking Spirit if she was ready to go, and if she was, to please let her pass peacefully, not to let her suffer, and to please let her know that I love her. Thoughts like that. After holding it back during the day, I needed to just feel these intense emotions fully, and I was finally getting them out. As I started to calm down, still saying the same prayers of sorts, I suddenly heard the loudest sound I have ever heard, while knowing it was not happening in the physical space around me. I didn't have a particular type of sound like a bell or a bomb blast, but it was so intense I thought I was going to have a tiny heart attack. It spooked me so bad. The worst part was it rose gradually from over my shoulder as I lay on my side into my left ear, and as it rose, I remember thinking, can it get any louder? And oh boy, it did. It felt so overwhelming and terrifying, and if I remember correctly, I think I straight up asked it to please stop, and it did. I had this thought that possibly something much, much bigger than my little old self just tried to talk to me, possibly comfort me, but their voice was not for my ears. It felt like a mountain tried to tell me everything was going to be okay, but instead made me feel like a hamster trapped in a jet engine. The adrenaline left me feeling like fight or flight, like I'd seen something scary, but I wasn't so sure it actually was. One thing I felt pretty sure of, though there's always a possibility otherwise, was that it was supernatural in origin. I don't have a history of exploding head syndrome, where you hear big booms in your head, especially waking from sleeping, so I don't think it was that. So this story is in partial a question. Was that a spirit trying to get through to me, and my barriers were so tall that I had to basically scream to get my attention? Or was it a being who didn't realize their voice would sound like that to me? Or was my brain exploding? Would love to hear if anyone else has had a similar experience during a time of intense emotions like that. I appreciate your listener stories and all you do. Thank you for listening. And that was sent in by Deanna. Deanna, thank you for listening. So let's break your story down a little bit. 1, I'm so sorry about your grandmother. That is not easy at all. And I can only imagine the emotions that you are going through and that you have gone through. So my thoughts are with you. Now, as far as your story, I would like to believe that your story was a spirit trying to get in touch with you. Who, I'm not sure. This story makes me feel like an angel was trying to talk to you. Who that angel was, I'm not sure. And when I say angel, I mean it more loosely in the fact of that it could have been a past family member. I did have quite recently in an email reading, the soul of a woman stepped forward, and the way she portrayed herself, even though she was a human soul, was very angelic. And I attribute that to her beliefs as a person when she was alive of like, well, I'm just an angel now because I'm in heaven. And that just might have been something that would have been said to the person that she was talking to, her family member that was living that I was emailing. So it might have been like a very special thing. And that's sort of the feeling I get when I read your story as well. But whoever angelic being, past loved one that this may be, spirit guide, if you will, they do give me an angelic persona about them, but I don't get more information than that. Like specifically, I get the feeling of a white area with like a yellow light in the middle, and then sort of the perception or outline of like angel wings towards the side. So it's more of just an image associated with feelings that don't have more like precise indicators of who or what this person may have been that caused this loud ringing in your ears. but I want you to know what it is that I see exactly. Hence why I'm like, I don't know specifically who it is because I don't see a person exactly. So I do want to say that big boom in your ears, I had to look up what exploding head syndrome was. And you are right. It's like when people wake up, they get woken up from like the sound of like gunshots or bombs exploding. And it's something that originated in the 1800s, but didn't have people actually start looking into it like neuroscience or psychologically until like the 1980s. And it only usually happens in mostly women over the age of 50. Which is interesting. But I'm glad that you checked for exploding head syndrome. Also, something that I tell people when I also have people talk about like having ringing in their ears, make sure you don't have tinnitus. Because if anyone else is listening that has had like a specific thing like Deanna has experienced before, make sure you don't have tinnitus. It's ringing in your ears. And exploding head syndrome is another one, just I guess because this was so intense for Deanna. However, sometimes when souls or spirits try to talk to us, our brain think of channeling soul or spiritual energy as like trying to fine tune a radio, right? You have to sort of get into the right channels in order for the static to not be static or a giant ringing that just gets louder in your ears, but instead sounds and voices and pictures that actually come through clearly. So I think you were asking for these things, and not only given the fact that you had this loud ringing in your ears, but coupled by the fact that even though you physically experienced this and your physical reaction, your visceral reaction to it was to be scared, but you said it felt like a mountain tried to tell me everything was going to be okay, right? So you got a sense of comfort. It says, I had this thought that possibly something much, much bigger than my little old self just tried to talk to me, possibly comfort me, but their voice was not for my ears. You got the information yourself, my guy, Deanna. You got the answer to your question while it was happening. I think your initial reaction to something, your visceral reaction of being scared, that was me when I was a child. I used to get so nervous when I saw souls and spirits around me. I was like, listen, I feel this energy that's coming off of you, but I don't know how to channel it. I don't know how to fine tune my radio station. So I'm just going to get anxiety. For you, you were just getting this loud ringing in your ears. But souls know, see, hear, and feel everything, whether they be an angelic being or not. And when you said, can you please stop it? It shut off. And you got that feeling of comfort, like someone was listening to your prayers over your grandmother and they're like, listen, we got you and we've got her. Everything's okay, my dude. And then it stopped, which I think is really freaking cool. So that is my answer for your story, Deanna. And I think you figured it out on your own. So I'm hoping that me telling you that just makes you put a little feather in your cap and call it macaroni. But thank you so much for sending in your story. And thank you all for listening this week to this Sunday's Listener Stories. I'm very happy to be here. Thank you all for listening. I will keep trying to send out listener stories at least once a month. We'll see. There's a lot of good things that are going to be happening soon, so we're going to have lots to talk about. But I appreciate you all being here. If you or anyone you know is interested in a reading, there should be reading availability on the website. You can find the website linked down in the show notes or in the description below. But until next Sunday, thank you all for being here and peace.